Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Jacobson and I am founder of the Daily Migraine, which as many of you know is a 300,000 person online support group. And I'm here today to interview Dr. David Dodick, who is chair of the American Migraine Foundation, president of the International Headache Society, and professor of neurology at Mayo Clinic. I remembered all of it by heart. Nice to have you here, David.
Good to be here with you, Lisa.
So today we're going to be talking about such an exciting topic. It is the new initiative of the American Migraine Foundation, which is called Move Against Migraine. And in my mind, it was top of my wish list that some organization would come out and actually give the money, the heft, and the resources to getting the word out there that migraine is not just a headache. So we are so excited to launch this, to have you guys then share it. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is share this on your own Facebook page, because then everybody you know will learn what a migraine is and what the initiative is. So please hit share to start. All right, let's start.
Okay.
First question, who is most impacted by migraine?
Well, I would start by saying that migraine doesn't respect age. Everyone seems to be affected by migraine. So I've got people in my clinic who are in their 90s. And recent evidence suggests that, when babies get colicky, that may be a migraine attack. So infantile colic may be the first manifestation of migraine.
For kids who are genetically predisposed to getting it?
Exactly.
So you think they're crying because you're the parent, you think they're crying because they have colic?
They could be in agony because they have migraine.
That's so sad.
It is. So, anybody and everybody can get it. But by and large, women are affected 3 times more often than men. It typically strikes them between the ages of 20 and 50, although many young girls at menarche start to experience migraine. but certainly boys and girls. In fact, for children and adolescents, about 10% are affected. About 1 in every 5 women are affected at some point in their life with migraine. And for men, it's about 6%, or about 1 in 15, 1 in 16. So not as many men as women, but certainly they suffer as well. And, unfortunately, it strikes women at just the time when they're trying to get an education, build a career, take care of a family, and it's debilitating.
Your most productive years.
Yeah.
So we all know, the patients who are watching this, that there's a stigma against migraine. Can you talk about what that stigma is?
Well, the stigma's been there for a very long time. In fact, there was a study done looking at patients with epilepsy, migraine, and asthma. And patients with migraine suffered from more stigma than with epilepsy and asthma. And in fact, the more frequent their migraine was, the more stigma associated with it. And stigma is about having a disease where it discredits the individual, right? And so an individual becomes discredited when they have migraine. That's why a lot of people carry around this internal stigma where they don't want to actually unveil that they have migraine. They feel embarrassed by it because of the response that they often get from even family members, but coworkers, friends. They're seen as less reliable. Right? And I think a lot of the stigma comes from the fact that they have something in common with everybody, with the rest of us, and that is headache. So if you think that just migraine's a headache, maybe a little more severe headache. Mm-hmm. Well, I get a headache, so you have what I have. But I show up to work every day. Why are you calling in sometimes, or showing up late for work, or calling in sick?
Or having a response that seems like completely overblown.
Exactly.
Right?
So you're exaggerating. You can't take stress. You have a low threshold for pain. Maybe you're even making it up sometimes. Mm-hmm. Because there's no biomarker. You can't take an X-ray of it. You can't take a blood test and measure it. And so because of that, because of the commonality of migraine and ubiquitous and pervasive nature of headache, we think we have something in common with you. We have nothing in common with you. You have an inherited neurological disease, only one manifestation of which is severe crushing head pain. It's all the other symptoms that come with you that adds to the disability.
Would you talk about what some of those are?
Sure. I mean, migraine really, I think of it as like a chemical and an electrical storm in your brain. You're genetically vulnerable for these storms just to come on you. You can trigger them, or they can come on spontaneously. They can even happen while you're sleeping. And 50% of the patients will wake up with their attacks. Mm-hmm. So this chemical and electrical storm is based on the release of certain transmitters in the brain and abnormal electrical activity. And so depending on what area is having that storm, right? So right now, maybe New York's having a storm, but it's really nice here in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
But if New York gives rise to vertigo, well, then you can have vertigo. So it depends on what area of the brain is affected. So you can have vertigo, you can have paralysis on one side of your body, you can have blindness, you can have trouble speaking, you can have trouble concentrating and processing information. You imagine, when I show the best way to get across the fact that migraine is a biological disease is to show the patient, and particularly the family members, I turn my computer around and say, look at this. This is a brain on migraine. This is a brain not on migraine. And all of a sudden, a picture's worth 1,000 words. When you see all the areas of the brain that are affected. So, in fact, a recent study showed that the cognitive dysfunction is the second most disabling symptom of migraine. The fact that you can't think straight, you can't concentrate, you can't process information, you can't speak clearly. Patients develop exquisite sensitivity to everything in their environment. The light's too bright all of a sudden. The noise is too loud. The sound is too loud. Odors, even pleasant odors, become intolerable. And that's because of an area in the brain that sort of modulates incoming information. The gain is turned up so that light becomes brighter, sound becomes louder, odors become more pungent, and any sensory information coming into the body just becomes amplified. So pain, and people with migraine can, of course, experience pain in other parts of their body. It's not just the head. So it's so much more than just a headache.
Wow, that's exhausting, and I know what
I
it's
know.
like. All right, so why isn't there a cure?
Well, it really goes back to the historic underfunding of research in this field. Migraine has historically been one of, if not the most underfunded disease in history. When you consider how many people suffer, we're talking about the third most common disease on the planet, and the sixth most disabling. And when you consider those facts, the fact that migraine in the United States gets about $15 to $20 million a year, while that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, it's a paltry sum in terms of medical research. So given how common it is and given how disabling it is, we should be talking about numbers anywhere from 2 to 400 million, not 20 million. So because of that lack of research, the pace of knowledge has been slow. And if you don't do a lot of research and you don't understand what's happening in the brain in a particular disease, it's hard to design treatment. If you have no targets, how can you design treatments that are specific for that disease?
So what is the reason why there isn't enough money in research or enough doctors who choose to go into this?
It comes back to the stigma. It's not a real disease, right? It's not been validated as a disease.
So when you went into this, what did people say to you? And when you decided to go into headache?
Why on earth would you do that?
Your colleagues.
We thought you had a relatively promising career.
Right.
It's true.
You just committed career suicide.
And to this day, some physicians will say to me, I don't know how you do what you do every day. And I love what I do every day, right?
And why do they say that?
Because they couldn't possibly deal with these patients. With these patients who come in with this invisible symptom, headache. And they whine about all the other, how it affects their life, and about all the other things that impacts them. The depression and the anxiety that comes along with it. And then they're stigmatized because of that. Well, it's your depression, it's your anxiety, you're too anxious.
Right.
You just need to settle down. That's why you're having all these headaches. Not to mention the fact that, of course, no matter what neurological disease you have, whether it's multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease or epilepsy, the prevalence of depression and anxiety is roughly the same. But when you have headache, it gets tied to the disorder as a cause, right? You have headaches because you're depressed or because you're anxious. So these people, as I've heard some healthcare providers say, come with a lot of baggage.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And when you don't understand what's happening, with a particular disease, whether it's chronic low back pain, it doesn't matter what it is, and you become expert in it, and you enjoy looking after those people, right? It becomes your mission in life. And when you have so many people who are so profoundly affected, and it affects their family members and everyone around them, just think of the enormous difference you can make in people's lives. I was given advice by a mentor one time when I was thinking about going in and specializing in this. And this mentor said to me, you know what? This field needs good people going into it. Look how many people are affected by this, right? And look how many people are so profoundly affected by this. This field needs good people going into it, doing the kind of research that needs to be done, and looking after them. And that, I remember that conversation to this day. It was back in 1993, and that was an inspiration to me. And then I went and spent a month with a headache specialist, and I had no intentions on going into headache. And I went and spent a month with this headache specialist because he was revered. He was a great clinician, and I had a lot to learn. And so I went and spent a month with him. That was it. To see the effect and the impact that he had on those patients and on the lives of those family members around that patient. And he had very primitive tools back then. That was over 20 years ago.
Right.
And to see how he impacted those people, I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do.
That is very inspiring. Wow. Wow. All right, so I've never heard you say that, so. Okay, so how many people actually get diagnosed? And for people listening, watching, where do you go, right? How many headache specialists are there in the country and in the world, and what do you do to find people who are trained properly?
Yeah, well, there are about 500 headache/migraine specialists in the United States.
So that's one for
every 65 to 80,000 people, right? None of us can handle that many patients. And what we need to be doing is stimulating young people in medical school and in residency to go into this field, right? And that's one of the things we as a foundation have been doing. We've been stimulating the development of academic headache programs at universities across the country to train more young people to specialize so that we can broaden the access to care for patients, specialty care. So that's a problem. It's hard for patients to find experts because only 4% or less are under the care of a specialist. So they go to a neurologist or some other specialist who has taken an interest in this. And there are a lot of neurologists who have taken a real interest in migraine. And if you go to the AmericanMigraineFoundation.org and put your zip code in, you can actually find those doctors, not just specialists, but doctors, not just neurologists, but internists and primary care doctors and ENT doctors who have sort of called themselves out as having a real interest and an expertise in this area. So people don't necessarily have to be seen by a headache specialist. They can be seen by their physician who has taken an interest in this.
Wow, I've never heard of anything online where you can actually put your zip code in. Usually you have to go down and it's in alphabetical order and it gives you a migraine because you can't tell where they are. So that's fantastic.
Yes.
So what is the societal impact of migraine?
Well, it's huge. I mean, the estimates are that it costs upward or more than $20 billion a year. It's hard for us to get
what that even means.
What that even means. But, you know, for families who have a migraine sufferer, their healthcare costs are 70% more than a family who doesn't have a migraine sufferer. That speaks volumes, right? About 113 million days of work are lost each year in the United States. That costs employers about $13 billion. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to go into employers and insurance companies and educate them on what migraine is so that we can advocate for better care for these people, for these patients. So the societal impact is much larger than any of us realize. Every 10 seconds, at least, there's someone going into an emergency department in the United States with migraine. It's the fifth most common reason for patients to go into an emergency department.
And people have not been trained on how to take care of them. And
No.
in fact, many people feel like they're called out as drug seekers.
Exactly.
When they go.
Exactly. You're looking for drugs. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the AMF initiative.
Yeah.
So, Move Against Migraine.
Well, it's the first of its kind and unprecedented public awareness campaign, and it's for patients. It's for patients. None of us would be doing this if it wasn't for patients, because I basically got sick and tired of, after 25 years, of seeing how patients were stigmatized and marginalized with this disease, the journey that they had to go through to find help, the difficulty I had as even a specialist in helping some of those patients because of still primitive tools that we have. So I thought it's time for a national public awareness campaign to really raise the awareness of migraine as a neurological disease, the most common one in the world, and the disability and impact that it has on people. It was time to raise awareness because other diseases have done this: epilepsy, autism, AIDS, and they've been very successful at it. And they've changed the public's perception of those diseases.
And some of those diseases had stigma. Talk about AIDS.
Big time, big time. So we can do this.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason we're doing this campaign. The other reason is that people with migraine have lived in the shadows for far too long. And that internal stigma that they carry around and being afraid to even, I have patients come into my office saying, I shouldn't even be taking up your time. They feel guilty even being there because they say there are many more sick patients outside in your waiting room. So it's that internal guilt and stigma that they carry around with them. So this campaign is about mobilizing them, organizing them to advocate for themselves and for the disease. Because we saw with AIDS, we see with breast cancer, we see with autism, we see with epilepsy, what happens when patients come together to advocate for themselves. They get more empathy from the public, more compassion and more understanding. Also from their employers, also from their insurance companies, and also from their legislators, right? Who can then make sure that more funding is directed towards research. Because when patients speak as constituents, policymakers, so it's both mobilizing and empowering those patients to come out of the shadows to advocate for themselves. And finally, it's to inspire and motivate more funding for research so that we can answer some of the fundamental questions that need to be answered to get the answers we need and to get the better and safer treatments for patients.
Right. And what's so great, I think, is the American Migraine Foundation is doing this initiative as sort of a foundation for all of us to jump off with. So we can take the materials, right?
Absolutely.
We can take everything that they have to offer and then share it on our own social media so this becomes just a viral campaign.
Absolutely.
We've never had anything like this.
No.
I mean, I know everybody watching is probably shocked. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is, and it's long overdue, and we want to educate everyone, and we want everyone to become spokespeople for this disease.
Right. It's like the way with social media, everybody's become a journalist with their own phone and their own video, right? Everybody can become an advocate. And just because, you're a single person by yourself with migraine doesn't mean you can't make a difference, make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So that leads me to the next question. So many of us, me included, who have had migraine daily or migraine for years and years, say, I've tried everything. I have no hope. So what do you have to say about having hope?
Oh, I always have hope. I have more hope than ever for patients right now because of, although funding for research has been slow, tedious, and small.
Yeah.
I mean, the group of passionate clinicians and scientists in this country, and indeed around the world, who have committed their careers to doing the research that's needed. We're on the precipice, actually, of new treatments that have specifically been designed for this disease. And indeed, we do have one class of medications that was approved, the triptans.
Mm-hmm. But that was 25 years ago,
That was
right?
back in 1991 when the first one became available. And they treat the symptoms, they treat the attack. And despite the fact that they've become the gold standard, about 1 in 20 patients actually gets a prescription for one. So they're not even utilized that often. And they have, there are some patients who can't take them. So we definitely need new treatments. There's a huge treatment need out there.
Well, we need treatments to prevent, right?
We need treatments to prevent. We need treatments to modify this disease so that we prevent an attack from being generated in the first place, so that patients aren't chasing their tail and taking medications which can have some side effects and which ironically can promote the disease from getting worse. Mm. So the more of these medicines you take, the more attacks you'll have, ironically. So it's a double-edged sword. It's short-term gain for long-term pain for many patients.
Wow.
And they get into this habit. It's not even a habit. They need pain relief. The more pain they have, and they're in this vicious cycle. So there's always help. There are many fine specialists across this country who have committed their lives and their careers to this.